Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're going to begin the funeral services now. Rabbi Eitan Weiner-Kaplow will be officiating. For those of you who are here, please take a moment to be sure that your phones have been turned off, not to disturb the sacred funeral ceremony, and we welcome those of you who are joining us via live stream.
גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא אירא רע. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא אירא רע. לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. לא אירא רע, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא אירא רע. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא אירא רע. לא אירא רע, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. לא אירא רע, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא אירא רע. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me, God. These words come from the 23rd Psalm. Adonai ro'i lo echsar. Bina odesha yar bitseni al mei menuchot yanahaleni nafshi yeshovev yanacheni b'ma'aglei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech b'gei tzal mavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulcha neged sororai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi ravaya. Achtov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti beveit Adonai. Le'orech yamim. The Eternal One is my shepherd, I shall never be in need. God has me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in paths of righteousness for the sake of your name. And even when I walk in the valley of the darkest of shadows, I will fear no evil. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You've set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Eternal One for all the length of days. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember her. In the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember her. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember her. In the opening of the buds, rebirth of spring, we will remember her. The blueness of skies, the warmth of summer, will remember her. In the beginning of the year, when it ends, we will remember her. So long as we live, Susie Fetell too will live. For she is now a part of us as we remember her. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember her. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember her. When we have joys we crave to share, we will remember her. And when we have achievements that are based on hers, we will remember her. So long as we live, Susie Fetell too will live. For she is now a part of us. She is in our hearts. She is in our minds. She is in our thoughts. She is in our very, very being as we remember her. Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. That she was. Eshet Chayil mi yimtza v'rachok mipninim michra. Batach ba lev ba'ala v'shala lo yechzar. A woman of valor, who can find? Her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and so he lacks nothing. She renders him good, never harm, all the days of her life. She knows that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. Oz v'hadar levusha v'tischak liyom acharon. She is clothed in strength and dignity and cheerfully faces whatever may come. Her children come forward and bless her. Her husband praises her, saying, many women have done well, but you surpass them all. Place before her the fruit of her hands, and wherever people gather, her deeds speak her praise. We're all here now. So let's begin this service, a funeral, this service to celebrate the life of Susie Fetell. We are saddened and we are grieved, and yet we're here to look at her life of 96 years from Austria through Switzerland and France to Argentina, from Argentina to the United States, New York, Cresskill, Chicago, Northbrook, all the places she lived. What a life indeed. Nevertheless, as we say our farewell, we do so as our ancestors have done over hundreds of years, over centuries, and over millennia, thousands of years, by searching for comfort through the words of prayer, through the words of the Psalms, through readings of memorial. And so I ask everyone who has gathered here this day to join together with Susie's family, with daughter Joan, with grandchildren Natan and Mandy and Elizabeth, with great-grandchildren Menucha and Ezra and Hadassah. Here we are as a community, And I'm also delighted to honor my colleagues, Rabbi Michael Weinberg, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth Israel, TBI, and Rabbi Rachel Marks, Rabbi of TBI. This is a chance to honor Susie, to say our farewell. We are an ancient people, and we are well acquainted with grief and the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name, Shem Tov, a good name endures forever. And so with Job, we say, Adonai Natan, God, you've given. You've given us a loved one who will not be forgotten. And for all that was good and enduring in Susie's life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai Lakach, God, you've taken away. And so we pray for strength to heal our broken hearts. And then we say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. Blessed be the name of God. Blessed be the source of life and love, family and community. Blessed be the name of the Eternal One, now and forever. 96 years. I've known Susie for, well, probably 30 or more of those years. And I have a feeling that I met Susie somewhere in a supermarket in Cresskill, New Jersey, back when I was a kid. Because it wasn't till Joan and I met and our families grew so close together that I realized that we grew up in towns right next to each other in New Jersey, and we played you in football. And I spent a lot of time in Cresskill. And you probably spent a lot of time in Tenafly. I think we met. Our families knew each other somehow going way back. Susie was special. Oh my, just a couple of thoughts from me before family. But that connection to North Jersey, that connection to New York, that beautiful, beautiful smile, that glint in her eye, and she had a love of life, but she had this matriarchal kind of air and this sternness when any one of us, me included, would step a little bit too far out of line. She just had a way of saying it. She had a beautiful way of calling you Joan, Joni, always. But she had this lovely smile when she realized, okay, enough, it's fun. I remember talking with Lester about New York and about the Lower East Side, and we went on and on about great food at Katz's and Yonah Schimmel's, and we would go on and on and on. And I remember that Susie would say, oh, you're talking about food on the Lower East Side? We'd say yes, and she'd go, okay. Like, okay, Narishkeit, whatever you want to talk about, go ahead. Not important, but fun. That was kind of that air that she would give, and then she'd smile and do something else. My kids remember playing at their pool, the pool at Mission Hills. That was special. I remember spending Seders together, second night Seders at your home, Joan. And your parents were there, and your mom was there. She had a special air. She was a dignified lady. She came from Vienna. She was an American, and she was so proud of that. There are so many stories to share. There is so much to tell. And so I'd like to call on members of the family to speak. First will be Michael Hakimi, and then grandson Natan and daughter Joan. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here to commemorate Susan Fetell and support her family. It is an honor for me to be given the opportunity to share a few words about our beloved Susan Fetell, affectionately known as Grandma. Susan was my mother-in-law and grandma for my adult children, Nathan and Ellie. I have known Susan for over 35 years. She was a key person in our family life. As the matriarch of the family, she played a central role in our family life. There are too many memories to recall. Suffice it to say, we shared countless joyous occasions and celebrations and some challenging times. My one personal memory that stands out for me is that she proclaimed I made the best kebabs that she truly enjoyed. Susan was a blessing to anyone who had the fortune of knowing her and having a relationship with her. Throughout the years, there was always a very warm and respectful relationship between us. This is a credit to her incredible ability to create an atmosphere of respect and harmony in her relationships. Her kindness and generosity in every respect are beyond words. She loved her family unconditionally. How fortunate for her family to carry this love in their hearts for the rest of their lives. Today we are gathered here to commemorate Susan Fetell, pay our respect, and say farewell. Today we accompany her to her final destination, next to her beloved late husband, Lester Fetell, and her mother, Wilma Lerner. May their memory be for a blessing. If there is a such thing as heaven, she certainly belongs there. Her legacy, love, wisdom, grace, and the beauty of her soul will live on. Grandma Susan's Fetell love will forever be in our hearts. May her memory be for a blessing. Amen.
My grandma, she passed away, I guess, 2 days ago, technically, Monday, like shortly after midnight. So, I was there, my sister and my mom were there at the Mather where she had been living for a number of years. And I guess it became pretty clear to the nurses that it was already trending right into that direction. So my mom, went ahead and called us, and we went there. And it's not easy, obviously, to be with someone who you love. Of course, she was 96 years old, so it's not the same type of like tragic grief, as God forbid if someone whose life is like cut short. She lived a long life, and as people have spoken about or going to continue to speak about, she was a beautiful person. And we're not so much necessarily mourning her as celebrating her, like Rabbi Eitan has said. But, nevertheless, death is it's obviously a very significant topic or reality. And so one of those things, like, people don't always know how to even process while you're alive, never mind, when someone passes away and you lose someone you love. It's like one of those like difficult topics. Like, how do you even know what to know? Like, there's nothing really to be able to necessarily directly understand. So people have different, views or lenses that they view it. And my grandma herself, ironically, would have been the first to tell you that, like, there's no such thing as an afterlife. You're gone and that's it. Like, she was very clear on that. It was just interesting because, she was like, I don't know what to call, not like a skeptic per se. She wasn't like a philosophical type, but more so just out of like, I think out of her pragmatism, out of like her, escaping the Holocaust and raising children in like suburban New Jersey in, I don't even know what decades, the 50s and the 60s. And like, I mean, I never really looked at my grandma as being like, such a. I mean, it's no secret that I'm like the black sheep in the family. I like became the religious one, So I decided like to believe in all of these like big, spiritual or metaphysical things. But I never looked at my grandma and thought like, oh, grandma, you're such a heretic or something. Like, it never even occurred to me to think that like, it's her problem somehow. It was just like, this is who she is, and at the same time, like Eitan also mentioned, she was very wise. Like my dad mentioned too, she was like she had a certain quality in her personality and her wisdom also. Like my dad said, that like made it always seem to me that like whether or not she necessarily openly or explicitly believed in such a concept as like whatever God or the afterlife or the soul or all these types of things, like I think if those things were real, it was very evident that they were like there with her. So it wouldn't. That's the way I always kind of looked at it, and I'm very happy now to have this opportunity. Actually, given the way I do now have a viewpoint on this, like kind of reality philosophy, sort of, that it's our opportunity and it's our really like responsibility to be here for her according to our perspective, that her soul will pervade and necessitates our like involvement in facilitating its journey. Like part of the reason for all these Jewish mourning rituals is because like of course the mourners are mourning, but we are also sort of like helping escort the loved one's soul or whatever that is, presence, into its next journey. So I am truly honored and blessed and privileged to try to be here to help be there for my grandma in that last stage of her journey at this point in time, at least. And as it says, that burial and eulogizing and so on are and Shiva and Kaddish, all these things are called a chesed shel emet, meaning like a true kindness, the type of kindness that's true because it's never going to be paid back, at least not like in a physical or direct way. So when you are there for someone in such a way, you're like really showing that you love them, and you're really showing that you cared about them in their physical life, and you're going to continue to care about them even after their physical life is over. And I really loved my grandma, and I still do, and I wish her a high level going forward, and we'll pray for her and for her memory. It'll be for a blessing.
There's a reason to write these things down. I don't know where I'd find the words. Thank you, my dear friends and family, for coming today to celebrate the life of my mother, Susie Fetell, and to support Ellie, Nathan, and me as we say goodbye to my loving mother and their adoring grandmother. Many of you knew my mother, and I have received so many beautiful notes describing her as lovely, kind, wonderful, caring, fun, amazing, remarkable, sweet, wise, and more. She loved our near and extended family as well as my friends, and loved being part of my life and my relationships. It feels good knowing her feelings were reciprocated, and also that she didn't drive other people crazy like she often did me. Some of you who knew her know her history and know that my mother was a Holocaust survivor. But for those who don't, I want to share the story with you so that it is not lost with her death. Also, I think my parents had the best how we met story of anyone I know, and I love sharing it. My mom was born Susie Lerner in 1926 in Vienna, Austria. Until the age of 11, she and her mother lived with her maternal grandparents, my great-grandparents. Her father, my grandfather, was an intermittent presence in her life, as he often traveled on business or spent his time hanging out with Czech and Austrian intellectuals in the coffee houses in Vienna. She recalled him unexpectedly and unannounced showing up to pick her up at school, but more often recalled his absence. When he began to hear word in the coffee houses that Hitler intended to invade Austria, he came to get his wife and child and escape. He had recently been on a business trip to Argentina, and his visa was still valid. They fled Austria by train through Switzerland and France, where they boarded a ship to Buenos Aires. I remember my mother telling me once, when I asked if she'd been afraid, that the thing that most affected her was seeing her father cry as the train crossed the Austrian border into Switzerland. It was only much later that she learned he cried because they were on the last train out of Austria before the border closed behind them. The thing she most remembered about the journey to Argentina was that she was the only child on the ship, and the crew were very nice to her and gave her oranges. My mom and her parents lived in Buenos Aires for 9 years until she was 20. Their lives in Argentina were hard, and my mother was often separated from her parents, at one time even living in a group home because her mother had to work as a live-in nanny for a wealthy Argentinian family. She learned to speak Spanish and English, graduated from high school, and went to work as a trilingual secretary. She was always very proud of being able to take dictation in 3 languages. When she was 20, her father, who wanted very much to come to the U.S., convinced her to go to the Austrian embassy in Buenos Aires to request visas for herself and her parents. My mother, who was always very good at managing and saving money, along with help from my grandmother's 2 brothers who were already in the U.S., had saved enough to pay for their fare. Although she didn't really want to do it, she went to the embassy and told the consular general that she and her parents wanted to go to the U.S. Her parents, both born in Czechoslovakia, were under the Czech quota, and she was told there was a 10-year waiting list for a visa. But he was very impressed by the chutzpah of a blonde, 5-foot-tall Austrian girl who spoke English and said she could pay for their tickets, and he put her and her parents ahead of everyone on that waiting list. He booked them passage on a freighter, the Mesa Vista, to New York, where they were the only civilian passengers. The trip to New York took 6 weeks. My father, Lester, was at that time completing his service in the Merchant Marines, and he was stationed on that ship. He was returning to New York City, where he was from, to finish college. During the long trip from Argentina to New York, he befriended my grandfather, and they often talked and partnered in bridge games with some of the other sailors. My mother professed to have no interest in him, even when one of his crewmates predicted, "You're going to marry that girl." They got to know each other when the captain of the ship got sick, and they were stuck in a port somewhere along the coast off South America for 2 weeks. With nothing else to do, they began talking and going for walks together. I remember my mother telling me that when they sailed into New York Harbor and she saw the Statue of Liberty for the first time, he gave her a penny to throw overboard and make a wish. She never told me what she wished for, but as a child, hearing the story, I used to tell myself that she wished she would marry him. I thought it was the most romantic story I'd ever heard. When they arrived in New York, my father went back to City College of New York to finish his degree and then to New York Law School to become a lawyer. My mother and her parents lived with my grandmother's brother and his wife for a year in New York, and my parents dated a bit, but not seriously. After a year, my mom and her parents moved to San Francisco, where my grandmother's other brother and his wife lived. My mom went to work at an import-export company and eventually met a man she became engaged to. She told me she never wanted to marry him, but he and his mother wore her down, and she agreed. My grandfather didn't like him and had a bad feeling about him, so he hired a private investigator to check him out. Turns out he'd been divorced and had been convicted of embezzlement. When he told my mother, she broke the engagement and went to New York for what was supposed to be a 2-week vacation to get over what had happened. She and my father got together during that time on a double date on New Year's Eve with my father's sister, Charlotte, and her husband, my Uncle Eddie. With urging from his sister, he ended up proposing to my mother. She accepted, never went back to San Francisco, and they were married 8 months later in August 1951. They were married for 48 years when he died in 2000. She never forgave him for not making it to their 50th anniversary. My father became a lawyer and they had 2 children, first me and then my younger brother, Bobby. They bought a house in New Jersey, in a suburb of New York City, and settled into an almost stereotypical American life. My mother, after the traumas of her early life, finally felt safe and happy, and she credited the United States and my father with her happiness. She became fiercely patriotic and got really mad at me during my anti-Vietnam War, anti-Nixon, and anti-US protest march days, and I said disparaging things about our country. She bought an American flag and made my father hang it up on every holiday because she was too short to reach the holder it hung on outside our house. She became a registered Democrat and voted in every election until 2016. She also learned how to be Jewish, as this had not been a part of her life in Vienna or Argentina. A friend taught her how to prepare a Seder, and we celebrated Passover and other Jewish holidays at our house with my aunts, uncles, and cousins on my father's side. She learned how to cook a turkey and other traditional Thanksgiving foods, and that holiday was also celebrated at our house. She planned my brother's bar mitzvah, even though she really did not have much of an understanding of what it was about. She was proud of her family and her life in America and felt she'd been able to leave the Holocaust behind her. It was never discussed, and my brother and I only learned about our family's history when I began asking questions in my 20s. She said she hadn't wanted to burden us with it. She never really identified herself as a survivor, even after I began to refer to her as one, because she had escaped. My mother was a survivor in every sense of the word. She survived the death of my brother Bobby by suicide when he was 34. She survived widowhood, episodes of anxiety and depression, physical issues including a heart attack, vocal cord cancer, pneumonia, COVID, broken bones from falls, UTIs that made her psychotic, and dementia that worsened over the last 5 years. Finally, at the age of 96, when she fell a few weeks ago and broke her wrist and shoulder, she was no longer able to keep going. The last weeks of her life were painful and difficult, but she was eventually made comfortable with the help of the amazing nursing staff at the Mather, where she lived for the past 11 years, and the care of an incredible hospice nurse who helped her die without pain. I will always be grateful to them. In the last days of her life, besides me, she got to see her grandchildren and great-grandchildren who she adored. Thankfully, Nathan, Ellie, and I were able to be with her when she died. We were able to tell her we loved her and to kiss her goodbye. Her family was the most important thing to her, and I will always be grateful for the time we had with her. My relationship with my mom was, as they say, complicated, but I loved her, and I know she loved me, and I will miss her. Mom, you were a good daughter to Granny, a good wife to Dad, a good mother to Bobby and me, a good grandmother to Ellie and Nathan, and a loving great-grandmother to Menucha, Ezra, and Dasi. We will miss you, and your memory will be a blessing to us always. Rest in peace, Mamacita. I also, this is not on the agenda, but I wanted to share, I got an email from one of my cousins last night. My mother was an only child, and I have cousins on my father's side. They were the cousins I referred to spending holidays with. And I wanted to share with you the message that I got from my cousin Richard with his thoughts about my mother. If I can find it, just bear with me. So my cousin Lee wrote, I jotted down some thoughts about Susie that I hope lets you know how we felt about her. Aunt Susie. Aunt Susie was always a favorite aunt. My family, my parents, Julius and Anna, and my brother Richard and I were over the river in Westchester, and so didn't see her as often as we might. She was nonetheless a real influence on me and holds a large and dear place in my memory. I remember her as an increasingly petite person as I got bigger and bigger. I remember her accent, gentler and more subtle than the accents of my other immigrant aunts. In my memory, she remains a warm and unflappable hostess at many family gatherings in her home in Cresskill, having to deal with a bunch of nieces and nephews, plus, of course, keeping Lester more or less in line. I remember bits of stories about kind of raucous times in Argentina before immigrating to the United States. I wish that I had learned more about that part of her life. Rita reminds me that she asked her just to call her Susie, something that Rita found especially welcoming. Classy was another way that Rita remembers your mom. My memory of her will always include her warm smile and an especially lilting laugh and her enjoyment of life and her family. She will live in our memory always.
Susie had two Hebrew names. One, Asher, which means wealth, riches, and the other Shira, which means song. It's a bit of a stretch linguistically, but if you take those letters of both names and rearrange them, you get the name Sarah. And how interesting that last week's Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, talked about the death of Sarah and about how Abraham honored her in so many special, special ways, finding her a beautiful place to be laid to rest and truly honoring her. But the name Sarah also means a noble woman, a woman of great nobility. And I'm just going to add that, a bit of a linguistic stretch, but I'm going to add that to her presence. I want to sing a song that was originally created for a young woman's bat mitzvah, setting out on her life. But in some ways, this song, Lechilach, can also talk about a woman as she comes to the end of her life and then continues to the next journey, whatever it may be. These words, Lech Lecha, were spoken to Abraham. I can imagine that Lechilach were spoken to Sarah. And so I offer these words for Susie. Lechilach, to a land that I will show you. Lechilach, to a place you do not know. Lechilach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. And you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechilach, Lechilach, and I will make your name great. Lechilach, and all shall praise your name. Lechilach, on your journey I will bless you. You shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechilach, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechilach. let's take just a few moments of silent memorial for each of us to remember Susie Fetell in our own deeply personal ways. Take a few moments. The Israeli poet Zelda Mishkovsky wrote this poem which speaks about the fullness of life and speaks about the many names that we acquire as we go through life. As I read this poem in Susie's honor, think about the many names that she acquired through the many things, the many experiences that she had in her long and wonderful life. Wonderful since she made it a blessing. Wonderful since she lived life to the fullest. And I said to you, Joan, a life of which I would say, well done. Well done. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatan lo Elohim v'natnu lo aviv ve'imo. Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by our walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our longing. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. L'chol ish yesh shem. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death. At this time, we continue with the chanting of El Malei Rachamim. This is the traditional blessing which asks that Susie's legacy live on, that her memory live on, and indeed it will. It will live on through each one of us, family, friends, community, each one of us whose lives was touched by Susie, each one of us who remembers her and remembers her life and remembers her deeds of goodness and loving kindness. Her memory and her legacy will indeed live on. In a few moments, I'll be asking the congregation to rise. I quickly add that for anyone present for whom standing is difficult, of course, you may remain seated. Please rise for El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim shochein pamromim. Hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina im kedoshim uteorim kezohar haraki hamasirim et nishmat asher shira bat Yohanu Vilma shehalecha leolama Baal harachamim yasireha beseter kenafav liolamim vayitzror bitzror chayim et nishmota Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Susie Fetell, the daughter of Johann and Vilma, who is known in Jewish tradition as Asher Shira, Bat Yohan Uvilma, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. For God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. V'nomar, and we say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery located at 9900 Grosse Point Road here in Skokie. The family will be together at the Hakimi residence at 601 Linden Place, Unit 112. That's in Evanston. They'll be together today following the interment till 9 p.m., then Thursday and Friday from 12 noon to 3 p.m. Memorials in her memory to Hadassah, Chicago would be appreciated. For those of you who are joining us online, all that information you could find on our website. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing many of the cars with a flag that will be affixed to the top portion of your car. We'll have a car in the back of the funeral procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own personal safety, I strongly recommend using a horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. At this time, I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place. And for those of you who've been asked to serve as pallbearers, please come forward as we escort the casket of Susan Fetell from the chapel along with the clergy. And out of respect to the clergy that are here, if you want to serve as honorary pallbearers, you may. You can just follow her casket to the hearse.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, Mina od eshiyav mitzei yameinu chot